so long since I felt your skin. It's been so long since I listened in to one of your shells and the song of your sea. Princess of the ocean, won't you come with me? Take my hand and come with me, darling, down to the shoreline. Take my hand.
Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending team. It's great to be back. Come along with us as we take our bonny wee wander along nature paths, shorelines, riverbanks, through woods and wetlands, parks and gardens, and it's a chance to hear some great Northumbrian stories. On today's show, the times they are a-changing in a most glorious and beautiful way. And our correspondents are here to celebrate all the joys of spring. Tom's giving thanks for the plants and the colours, scents and joy that they have brought through winter, and here now to the exciting eve of the new season. Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust has been busy here on an island that's very close to my heart, Lindisfarne, and looking into septic tanks. Well, he gets all the good jobs, doesn't he? Tom Cadwallender is marking a special day for a bird made famous by Saint Cuthbert and singing the praises of the ornithological therapy of birdwatching. Plus, some top tips for the garden from Tom P, all coming up on the Nature Garden podcast. And without further ado, let's welcome back war gardening chap, Tom Pattinson, who's giving thanks for some old plant chums and the arrival of the new season.
Gosh, it's good to be getting back into the garden again. I have, over winter, been out there as often as possible, and of course it's never been dull because I've been surrounded by many of my gardening friends, my plant friends in the garden, and they haven't failed me at all. That lovely yellow jasmine, Jasminum nudiflorum, it started flowering, as most of them do, way back in November, and it's just finished flowering now. Not bad at all winter flowering. Also Viburnum tenus, the evergreen viburnum with those white clusters of flowers, no fragrance at all, but just super to look at. The other is Viburnum bodnantense dawn. That's the one that's deciduous, and it has these beautiful clusters of pink flowers which are so highly fragrant. And then of course the icing on the cake, as far as I'm concerned, is a standard form tree of Prunus subhirtella autumnalis rosea, the winter flowering cherry. Some call it the autumn flowering cherry, but that is an injustice to it because it starts flowering October, November, and it keeps on flowering all the way, and it's just finishing off now. Long names they have, but long flowering too. They've been a boon to me over winter. But oh, those mornings, trying to get up, wake up in the morning when it's dark at 6:30, 7 o'clock, 7:30. What a difference now. The sun is waking me up. If not the sun, then the daylight. And I can get out early and inspect the greenhouse and the garden, of course. The temperatures have been down in the cold or unheated greenhouse and around here in the garden as low as -6 Celsius over the winter period. Now we're looking at and enjoying 9 to 10 Celsius some days. It's just like being in the Mediterranean. So those shrubs that have kept me going over winter, now's the time, just before they break bud, that's the growth buds, and start growing again, I can get in and prune them. Most of them, the viburnums, the evergreen and the deciduous one, it can take as much pruning as you wish. It won't kill it off. This is the ideal time to get in there and prune, and then put on growth afterwards. Similarly, the jasmine, the winter jasmine, do the same with it. Other shrubs are taking over. The witch hazel has been brilliant with those gorgeous yellow clusters of strap-shaped flowers. They've just been brilliant with a slight fragrance to them as well. It's still flowering. It's been flowering for the best part of three weeks anyway, and it will continue for another week or so. It's a class shrub for winter time, a real class shrub. The ribes, common garden ribes, or flowering currant as some people like to call it, it's just flowering now as well. I've got a few I raised from hardwood stem cuttings in the autumn, 2 or 3 years ago. I've found some out to friends and so on, but I have about 3 or 4 in the garden, and they're just beautiful at the moment. And oh, that forsythia, the golden forsythia. I've been taking little snippets of shoots on because the flower buds have just been plumping up, ready to flower. I've been taking those off and bringing them into the house, and I've been buying at the local supermarket a bunch of daffodils for £1 for about 15, 16 in a bunch, put them into a vase, and I've put these stems of forsythia in with them. And after 2 or 3 weeks, you change the water every week, of course, and after 2 or 3 weeks, they've started rooting, which is superb. Another shrub that's done well with me is this Skimmia rubella. That's a male form, which has those gorgeous clusters of red buds. It's flowered all winter with me. And of course, there's the bulbs. They are flowering like bilio at the moment. Chenodoxa, glory of the snow. Scilla, the blue scilla. Cyclamen, cool, that tiny cyclamen, hardy as anything. The crocuses, of course, and those dwarf narcissi. The dwarf ones always come up well in advance of the tall daffodils narcissi. They are superb at the moment. And you know, this is still nature's planting time. We've still got time to plant plants in a bare-rooted state. So I'm making use of that over the next week or two before the chance vanishes and moving plants around in the garden. More of that in a minute.
Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology is celebrating a bird made famous by Saint Cuthbert. This renowned monk of Holy Island and the Farnes, and former Bishop of Lindisfarne, was also famous as a protector of animals. Cuthbert's Day is on March the 20th, and March the 20th is now a special date for our beloved county bird, the eider, also known as Cuddy's duck.
We tend to think of the spring equinox as a time of change, which it is, of course. But I like to think of it as a time of renewal as well. And ornithologically speaking, change is a constant. Every single day is different. Birds are changing all of the time. And I'm thinking of birds which have come here for the winter time. Species like widgeon and teal, these birds have come from an awful long way north, northern Siberia, northern Europe, Scandinavia, for all those sort of places, really bad winters. But they've come here for the winter. And when they arrived last back end, their plumages were largely worn out. They're in their eclipse plumage, the feathers were heavily worn. And so during the course of this winter, they've been going through a feather change, a molt. So they've molted from that sort of worn out plumage into their most pristine uniforms. They're really ready and primed for the breeding season. So these birds will be kind of heading north ever so soon, ever so shortly. In fact, the next 3 or 4 weeks we should see some of these waders and wildfowl heading north. In fact, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've seen skeins of pink-footed geese heading north. They're going to end up in Iceland or Greenland, northern Greenland, believe it or not. But also, what will happen is they'll probably stage in northern Scotland. They'll spend a bit more time up there, ready to embark upon the arduous journey across the North Atlantic to those far north climes. But they've got to time it so they when they get to their breeding grounds, that they are available and the ice is gone largely from those areas. So we're seeing that change from those winter sort of get your head down sort of times to thinking about the breeding season. And along those lines, I'm thinking of some of the resident bird species, the dunnocks, the blackbirds, the song thrushes. They've been singing these last 2 or 3 weeks. And we all recognise the song thrush song. It's the repeated sort of phrases of the song thrush, and they've been sitting quite high, and they'll sing from early. These birds are kind of the whole idea is to attract a mate to set a territory. So the trigger has been pulled for those birds, and the increased day length hours has made that all the more important. There's something in their DNA. There's some sort of trigger within them. So when the day length lengthens, they will set out on there to set up their breeding territories. So we're seeing them in our gardens all the time now. So they really are quite sort of vociferous and vivacious in their courting. So we're seeing some change going on there, but also it's a time for summer visitors to arrive. The swallows, the swifts, where are they? Well, it's still a bit early yet. A lot of these birds they've hit the south coast and southern parts of the UK, but here in Northumberland, I like to think, or tend to think, that the summer visitors don't tend to arrive in any number until sort of early April. Last weekend there was a chiff chaff, or several chiff chaffs around on the Aln estuary, which is quite interesting, and a friend at Gosforth had picked up a couple of sandmons. But I don't expect us to see any numbers of these birds until April. But it's a period change. It's kind of happening. We're going through this whole kind of renewal of our birds. They're all changing, which is absolutely amazing. But the 20th of March is also important for another species, and it's the eider duck. The 20th of March has been declared the World Eider Duck Awareness Day by the Berwickshire and North Northumberland European Marine Site Partnership. So they've said we should be raising the profile of this species. And who knew that the county bird of Northumberland is the eider? Of course it is. We all knew that, didn't we? But it's a wonderful bird, and it's a bird that we should all be familiar with if we live in Northumberland, because the male is resplendent in its black and white plumage, and it's got this lovely pale green patch at the back of its head on its nape. Wonderful. And the females are much more kind of subdued. They've got this cryptic plumage, and they're because they will be sitting on the nest, of course, in due course. But they're now displaying. You go to Amble Harbour, you go to Seahouses Harbour, and you'll see them there, and you'll hear the males. The males are so iconic. You'll hear them ooh ooh as they go about their business trying to attract a female. And we should be sort of conscious of these birds, and we should be raising the awareness of these birds. The eider was first protected by Saint Cuthbert, and that's where kind of their old folk name came from. They used to be known as Cuddy's duck or Cuthbert's duck, simply because he put his wing around them, his arm around them, and actually created the first bird protection regulations when he was on his retreat on the Farne Islands. And he said to the locals, "No, these birds should be protected because of one thing and another," and that created the first bird protection regulations. But in modern times, the eider is going through quite a bit of a tough old time of it. The population is in decline. There's a slow decline, and we're trying to figure out what it is. And the basic point is that the females aren't in good enough condition coming out of winter to produce large enough clutches, brood sizes, raising enough young to keep the population going. Now they breed on the offshore islands like Coquet and and the fawns. And there's a few breed on mainland, but they're quite hard to really figure out because they're hard nests to find. And of course, the females will bring young eiders across from the offshore islands at 2 to 3 days old. And it's incredible to think that these little balls of nothing will actually cross stretches of quite treacherous water. And they're assisted by their aunties as well, of course, because they have this kind of communal thing going on. It's quite interesting, that whole process. And hopefully I'll be able to tell you more about that in weeks to come. But it's quite interesting. The eider is the county bird of Northumberland, and we need to know more. We all need to know more about them, and we need to be aware of what's going on here, and actually celebrate the eider duck. It's a fabulous bird, Saint Cuthbert's duck. I love that name. It's fantastic. So yes, we shall hear more about that in due course. So today, the 20th of March, shall forever be known as Eider Duck Day.
Bare-rooted plants might not look like much at first sight, but the magic is all to come, and Tom says there's still time to plant them. Container plants offer a more expensive option, but they're also worth considering as a garden booster. Here's Tom with his thoughts on the merits of both.
There's a certain period in the gardening year when we can move plants around from A to B. That is woody perennials. It's called bare-rooted planting, and it happens between November, when we're in autumn, all the way through to the end of March. In the absence of frost, you can dig a plant up, be it an ornamental tree or shrub, as long as you can handle it, manage it, fruit trees and bushes, roses and herbaceous perennials, and you can relocate them somewhere else in your garden. You're exposing the roots, but only for a short time. It's also possible during that period to order something by mail order, or go along to a nursery that's open and buy bare-rooted plants. And they are literally bare-rooted. There's no soil covering their roots. If you order hedging, the hedging plants will come tied in bundles, bare roots exposed. Well, they'll be covered and moist, hopefully, when they arrive. So the first thing you do is plunge them into water and leave them in there for a few hours to make sure the plant, even though it's dormant, is fully charged and ready to go. Bare-rooted plants are cheaper, less expensive to buy than pot-grown plants. But remember, it's last call for planting them. This period between November to March, generally speaking, that's when they're available. After that period, the nurserymen are not digging them up naturally because they're getting to full growth. The other option is container grown plants, and that's a totally different option because those plants have been grafted, budded, or raised from stem cuttings and have grown on, or division, whatever, in the case of herbaceous perennials, and they've been grown on in containers, generally large pots. And because they've been grown on, that is labour intensive, so this is reflected in the cost. They're much more expensive to buy than the bare-rooted plants. For example, if you bought a bare-rooted apple recently, say a lovely discovery, an eating apple which is ripe by the end of August, if you bought it, say, on a dwarfing rootstock, bare-rooted, it will cost you about £20 to £22, something like that they've been selling for. If you bought one in a pot, which had been pot-grown, it's going to cost you between £45 to £50. If you don't believe me, have a look next time you're at the garden centre. And I say it's good value for money, because that apple tree is going to outlast you. They go on for decades with decent, if you look after them in a reasonable way. Another good example is the plum, the Victoria plum, which, like the apple, is self-fertile. They look expensive as a one-off purchase, but they last for decades also. Good value for money. Now, getting back to the bare-rooted planting, when you are planting these out, make sure that the hole is deeper and wider than you require for the roots. Plant them at more or less the same level, certainly no more shallow, but plant them at the same level. You look for the mark on the base of the stem that they've been growing in the nursery. Get some organic matter, well-rotted organic matter into the base there before the planting hole. Get some compost in, or potting compost, and a bit of soil, and water that area before you actually put the plant in. Get the water down at the roots. Make it firm as you backfill, stake it if necessary, a supporting stake, and make sure it's watered well afterwards. That's the way at the moment. Last call, remember, a couple of weeks left for your bare-rooted planting. If you're going to buy and plant any time of year, especially getting towards the summer, make sure, for goodness sake, that you water well in and keep on watering until the plant is established. And if the roots are in circles, pot-bound, tease them apart before you actually plant. Bare-rooted planting, container bought plants to go in as well.
This is the Nature Garden Podcast with Carl Steinson, Tom Pattinson, Tom Cadwallender and Steve Lowe.
Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust has been spending some time in North Northumberland recently, one of the most rural parts of England. He's on a mission to inspire us to think about our interactions with nature, and he's been looking into the contents of septic tanks, if you know what I mean. Here's Steve to tell us more.
Hi there, this is Steve Lowe from Northumberland Rivers Trust. Hope you're all well. We've had a really busy few months actually with the Rivers Trust. We've been very active, even though we've had to work within COVID guidelines. But one of the things we've been doing is been working up around Lindisfarne and Holy Island, which has been a real pleasure. Obviously at this time of year you get loads and loads of birds there, and I think most people know that it's an important wetland site. Many people indeed will be aware that it's internationally important for its overwintering bird species. 50,000 ducks, geese and wading birds are there during the winter. We've got the population of the light-bellied Brent geese that come all the way from Spal border every year, and that's our only wintering place in the UK. So we know it's important, but many of us probably don't realise that it's really starting to suffer. It's under threat, and I think this is something that we really need to take notice of. The reason why it's under threat is because of something that we call diffuse pollution. Now, diffuse pollution means that you've got little bits of nutrients coming from lots and lots of different sources. Now, nutrients could be all sorts of things. It could be coming from farmland, doesn't have to be very much, because the catchment for the area is actually really big. So lots and lots of little bits of nutrients getting into that watercourse from farmland will actually accumulate and become a problem. In addition, we've found that there's quite a problem appears to be coming from roads, but also from septic tanks. Most of North Northumberland, believe it or not, doesn't have mains sewerage like the rest of us down in the southeast bit, and that means a lot of people actually rely on septic tanks, and yet quite a lot of the properties in that area are also holiday let, so we're not quite convinced that they're always managed as effectively as they could be. In fact, most people don't realise that they do need some management. So this could also be another source of nutrient. So why is it a problem? Well, the reason is because all this nutrient gets into the water, and it provides conditions for what we call opportunistic algae. Now, these algae grow in a matted type of fashion, and they actually cover the native vegetation, so that no sunlight's getting to that, so therefore it dies, and that also means that there's no oxygen in the muds beneath it, or the deposits beneath it, which means that there's no invertebrates, which means that there's no birds. So it's quite easy to see that unless you can deal with some of the source problems, then you're not going to be able to make a difference. And actually, it's something that we need a lot of buy-in to try to address. So one of the things we're doing, we've produced some information. We're going out next week actually to distribute quite a lot of that round the shires, as it were. But we've also been doing walkover studies. And the walkover studies have meant we've been walking catchments. We've walked from the hills up in there around Belford, which is where most of these streams start from, all the way down to the coast. Lots and lots of tributary streams. We've taken photographs of all of them. Just finished, as it happens today, mapping all of the issues. And as I say, there are no real smoking guns. There's lots and lots of little issues, which we can deal with independently, and there's lots of opportunities to do things positively as well. So although this is an early part in the project, we're hoping that we'll be able to work with landowners and also with communities and etc. to try to reduce that pollution. As I say, we're actually just about to put a leaflet out, but if anybody wants any basic information on how to manage septic tanks, for instance, there's lots of information online. And with farms, we've actually got this guidance called Farming Rules for Water. It's more than guidance, it's rules, which are actually now in a position to be enforced a little bit more, but would be far better if we could actually work together to stop problems rather than having to deal with them through enforcement measures if we can. So we're looking forward to this. Hopefully we'll play a little part in making what is, in my regards, one of the best bits of Northumberland even better. Thanks now.
Thanks to the citizens' science data collected from the BTO's Garden Birdwatch, we are finding out so much more about visiting and native species. The data spans over 20 years and the latest results are food for thought. Tom Cadwallender has been dipping into some of the findings, and it's never been clearer how important our birds and green spaces are.
Gardens are rapidly becoming quite an important habitat for a range of bird species. And, I'm thinking particularly now about the songbirds like dunnocks and song thrushes and blackbirds. And we've got into the habit generally as a society of feeding birds, which is a good thing. And many of us will do it during the winter time, but a lot of folks will actually do it in the summer as well, which is fantastic. And we put water out and we put nest boxes out. We kind of manage the gardens to manage the kind of the foliage within the gardens to benefit wildlife generally and birds in particular, because they are a kind of an obvious manifestation of nature in our gardens. And the figures tell us that the urban or rural gardens is a most rapidly growing habitat in the country, because there are more houses being built, of course, so they will have gardens. So there's a huge growth in that particular area. And really, because it's so important to a lot of bird species, we need to have some sort of handle, and that gives us an insight into some bird populations too. So, and it's quite a valuable kind of touchstone, if you like, about how bird populations are going. And over the last 25 years, the British Trust for Ornithology have been running a garden birdwatch where up to 20,000 people have been sending data which they have collected from their gardens on a weekly basis into the BTO, and the BTO have been doing analysis of this data. So we've got this fantastic 25-year weekly resource of knowledge, and it's terrific. Actually, it's become really quite an important survey. And the results of the 2019-2020 year has just been published. And what those results tell us, there's been a mixed bag for many garden birds. You know, the mild winter of 1920 really had a significant impact on a lot of our small birds, you know, the blue tits and grey tits, for example. The survival rate went through the roof, and there are more wrens around, there are more long-tailed tits around. These birds, which are kind of small and they're kind of really quite vulnerable to periods of poor weather, and they've survived it simply because the winter wasn't so bad. But we had more birds ready and waiting to enter the breeding season, and you think it's going to be a bumper season because of that kind of increased population. However, it didn't work out that way. What we've ended up with is actually quite a poor breeding season because the summer was largely dry and many birds couldn't actually feed. I'm thinking of thrushes, you know, song thrushes and blackbirds, for example. They feed on invertebrates in the soil, and they couldn't feed on them because they weren't accessible, because the ground was hard, because it was dry. And that was as a result of the long dry summer we had. And there was a detrimental impact, so that their success wasn't so great. So we have to think about that. And also the species like blue tits and grey tits have had an impact as well, because their breeding success wasn't as great. So yes, whilst it might have been good for us, it wasn't necessarily good for some of these breeding birds. And we wouldn't have known this until we had this great run of data. So we've measured the number of birds coming and using our gardens, have been sort of counted coming into our gardens, and we've done the data analysis, and we've looked at, and these are the results. Absolutely fascinating. But you know, over the period of the last year, when we've had this kind of the various lockdowns, seeing birds in our garden has proved to be incredibly important for our kind of mental well-being, and it's proved a good ornithological therapy for our woes and some of our mental health issues. And so we shouldn't underestimate the value of our gardens. And I know Tom will tell you some great tales about how you should be growing things in your garden, and it's vitally important that we do that. And it's wonderful, really, that we do. And we should be sort of protecting our feathered friends, not just from their benefit and what they do in the environment. Actually, we should be protecting the environment generally. But actually, there is a spin-off, the fact that it actually does us the world of good as well. So there's some great things happening. But the BTO Garden Birdwatch is a great survey. And if you're particularly interested in this, and it's just recording data on a weekly basis and sending into the BTO head office, and they'll do the analysis. And it's a great bit of citizen science.
Let's join Tom Pattinson for some timely equinox spring inspiration and tips for the garden.
And so to jobs for the week. Here are the items I'll be dealing with this week. My first priority is vegetables. We have a short enough growing season here in the north of England, so I'd like to get a few early vegetables started off. But it's far too cool in the soil, not warm enough at the moment to support germination. Maybe it would support germination, but I'm taking a risk because there's still frost in the air. The soil is damp. I don't want to waste good seeds. I start them off indoors, not in a warm greenhouse. I haven't got heat in the greenhouse, just natural heat from the sun. But I have a lot of fleece in there to cover young seedlings as they're developing. So which are the toughies amongst the early vegetables? Well, mine are the broad beans, the peas, the shallots and the onion sets. So they go into pots. Or also the lettuce, they go into modular trays, a little pinch into each module in the tray. I've got some peas germinated and beans germinated already. I put 3 beans to a pot, a small pot, and I put 5 peas to a pot. Once they're started, we're away, and that gives me a lot of joy to see them developing. I've also got in there the Musselburgh leek. I like to start the leeks off early. They're quite tough as well, and there's some onions in there for good measure. They've germinated and they're on the bench in the cool greenhouse, so they go along very well. Next up, the lettuce is going from the module trays. Once it's germinated, there's a little plug with it of root, and put it straight into the greenhouse border. The border that in May is used supports a crop of tomatoes, but between now and May it would stand empty, so why waste space? And it's leaf lettuce, and that leaf lettuce we can pick at all the way up to May. Little tasty treats. I've also got three actually, strawberries potted up into 4.5 inch, 5 inch pots, old money, something of that nature, large pots, and they are on the greenhouse bench and they're coming along nicely, shooting. They will have some flowers on and fruit before the fruit is ready in late June outdoors. So some early fruit there. Outdoors, I've put a large pot inverted over the clump of rhubarb. There's quite a few crowns there just showing themselves, so I've put that, stuffed some straw inside, and that is starting to shoot, forcing some rhubarb. And that is keeping things ticking over in terms of vegetables. It's important, if you sow vegetables outdoors, at the right time when the weather is reasonable, say May to June, or late May, early June, if you sowed, say, something like courgettes on a little mound outside, no sooner have they germinated than overnight you find the slugs have been, and they've eaten the tops off, and they've eaten the little seedlings. They don't stand a chance. So my take on it is to sow my own courgettes in pots in that greenhouse, grow them on, and of course the sweet corn and things of that nature, and put them out as good plants, young plants which are sturdy, got a bit of growth, and the slugs just don't stand a chance. They just grow on and they're away. Brilliant. Moving out into the lawn, it needs a cut now again. It was cut about 10 days, a fortnight ago, and it's gathering pace now, the grass, and growing. So this would be its second cut. The first one, I raised the blades so it didn't go too close to the ground, and this time I'll lower the blades slightly, the cutting cylinder, and that will keep that going. Don't worry too much about moss. There's various reasons why moss grows in a lawn or develops in the lawn. It could be that the drainage system isn't adequate enough. It could be that the soil is impoverished and acidic in nature. That encourages moss. If it's in the shade of trees or shrubs, that too encourages the development of moss, and cutting it too close allows moss to get in there amongst things. So whatever you're doing, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to Gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Steve Lowe from the Northumberland Rivers Trust. I'm Carl Steinson, and do check out our Twitter and Facebook page, The Nature Garden, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, merry equinox and a geet muckle hearty welcome to spring. Have a great week, folks. Bye for now.